Welcome back. In the second part, I'm going to be talking with Council at Large candidate Jill Ortman-Fouse and Matt Post about security in schools, gun legislation, and the apparently very tall order of keeping guns out of schools. Now, let's begin with you, actually. So, as I said at the beginning, you spoke at the March for Our Lives. How did you get to do that, and what, if you can repeat, what were your main points after that recent shooting, and how did this really spark you to focus on this issue, or were you already focused on it?
So the way I ended up at the march is after on March 14th, thousands of Montgomery County students walked out of school and to the Capitol for a sit-in front of the White House for 17 minutes to remember the 17 kids who died in Parkland. We then went to the Capitol, and I was one of the speakers, and my speech caught the attention of the Parkland kids, who then extended me an invitation to also speak at the March for Our Lives. And what I said at both was sort of twofold. The first, that more than anything, this is an issue of our moral political rot as a country, how we are allowing just machines to take priority over children's lives, and how absurd that dichotomy is, and that there are some that fall on the side of guns in that equation. And also that it's very foolish to just think of this as a school shooting issue. This is not an issue about keeping guns out of schools. It's an issue about just preventing people from dying by bullet senselessly, or dying by bullet at all. So, I don't see I feel the same pain for the kids who died in Parkland as I do about the unarmed man who was shot in Silver Spring, as I do about the people who died in D.C. a couple weeks ago, just walking home, as I do for Zion Kelly's brother, who was shot when he was walking home from school in D.C., as I do for all the people who die in places like Baltimore every week and every month. This is an issue of our gun sickness of a country. And it's also an issue of things that are enormously politically popular. 97% of people support universal background checks. 67% of people support a ban on semi-automatic rifles. It's hard to imagine someone who would oppose something like a locker law or a safe storage law. This is just an issue of us, the people, trying to overcome the political might of a few special interests.
Yeah, two things on that. First, personal connection. The way this floors me, how frequent these, not just school shootings, but any shooting of unarmed or just unsuspecting people, and how some people have just become so numb to that. It's just a couple times a week you hear about this. And
well, I would also
statistically,
say
it's probably every day.
People are becoming numb to school shootings because you can just look at the difference in the response to Parkland and Santa Fe.
Right.
But people have been numb for a long time about the gun violence that's happening in our communities of color. Like I said, 3 or 4 people were shot in D.C. the same week as Santa Fe. And even though Santa Fe didn't get that much coverage, I bet you guys didn't even hear about what happened in D.C.
Right. Yeah, so the way this is oddly personal, this is just kind of a way to measure perspective and international perception of America. I'm not sure how much you or other viewers are familiar with my background or just kind of international affairs, but I used to live in the Russian Northern Caucasus, like near to Chechnya, which currently is not as dangerous as it was 20 years ago. But I had a roommate who was from the Republic of Ingushetia. She grew up in the 90s. It was a war zone. It still is pretty much anarchy. She would kind of just matter-of-factly tell me about how, I was walking to school and then a tank would roll by. So she grew up in essentially a war zone. She was a student of English. She was a very good student, and she really wanted to come and study in America. Her parents said, "I forbid you because I'm afraid you're going to get shot." So people who grew up in a war zone are afraid to come to the U.S. because of the gun violence.
Right.
That was just absolutely shocking. And so,
and that's our reputation throughout the world, that we are in love with guns. I know I was in Prague, and there was a bar that was American themed, and it was all about guns. Like, that was the theme, was like we're in the Wild West, and that was how you show American culture.
Oh my gosh. So another thing I wanted to ask you was about what you think the role of the NRA was. And my perception, and I don't know if this is correct or not, but is that it used to be just about gun safety. Like, how do you use a gun? How do you store a gun? What are the proper safety procedures to shoot, whether you're hunting or whatever you use it for, correctly and not have it in the hands of the wrong people. And now it seems to be just a special interest group where it's like, we just want to sell more guns. Is that accurate? Is that really what the problem is, or is it more complicated?
What's really disturbing to me is that as more attention got put on the tragedies that happened, gun sales actually went up, because people were afraid that we were going to be taking their guns away or keeping them from buying guns. To me, that was a tragic outcome that I would have never expected.
Yeah, I mean, I think the NRA or Second Amendment absolutists, they don't want to see any movement whatsoever because they're worried it's a slippery slope, and they're worried that anything that happens will curtail the sale of guns and hurt the gun lobby, which are ultimately their funders. So this is more than anything an issue of greed than anything.
Yeah, it does kind of make sense. A lot of the problems with any political progress we want to make ends up, well, there's some kind of entity that stands to make money, and if they're going to lose money on it, then it's pretty much a no-go. But I'm curious, what you're going to say?
No, I was just going to say, and the ideas that have been put forth both at the state level here in Maryland and across the country on what we should be doing in schools around guns and safety is the opposite, I think, of what we believe in Montgomery County Public Schools. We absolutely don't believe in arming teachers in our schools. That actually has come up on in our state legislature.
But potential grizzlies.
It's crazy. We actually made a resolution saying that we did not support guns and arming our school staff. I mean, and that's just wrong on so many levels, which I think are pretty obvious.
So I guess we'll start there. What is generally the proposal for Montgomery County schools? Is it just to heighten security, or is it something that kind of legislated upward about carrying it? Like,
we have a multi-pronged approach. We're using all of the wheels in the wheelhouse on this one, and we got this additional funding, which Matt can talk more about. We have a 45-day plan for our schools to make them more safe. We're talking about social, emotional health, as well as training staff, as well as the technology solutions for more video cameras, as well as looking at placement for security in your schools to make sure you've got eyes on the ground everywhere, to school meetings and forums to get the input from students on how to make their schools more safe, to security measures around entering and exiting school buildings. One thing we won't be doing, which we were talking about earlier, is the Lieutenant Governor of Texas, who said that what you need to do is build schools with less doors, and that would be a bad safety decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that really doesn't even make sense as to like the way a lot of Republicans try to stretch things to be able to
avoid talking about guns.
Yes.
I mean, some of the things that you talked about, like, what are they called? The metal detectors. I mean, for our schools, when you have a school like Blair High School that's got almost 3,000 students all coming in at one time, and how do you make sure that you're addressing every student that comes in, or even with the clear backpacks? I mean, what kind of sense does that make? What we're trying to do as much on the preventative level and as much on the training level as we possibly can. One thing that we didn't talk about on the preventative level is restorative justice practices. We got a significant grant from the RAND Corporation to pilot projects in our schools around restorative justice. which is that it's instead of looking at the discipline, it's not about discipline, it's about prevention and relationships, and making sure that when your students are struggling, that you know why they're struggling, and there's interventions, that they get the interventions they need, and then if damage is done, that reparations are made.
Yes, and you had mentioned that the school's got some kind of funding for like different aspects of this approach.
Yeah, so we are in the middle of our 45-day action plan to bolster school security across the system. We've distributed door magnets to every classroom in the county so that every door can lock from the inside, not just the outside. We are also adding more security cameras, requesting more money from the county to build guided entryways where they don't exist. And to give you some context to what that means, in a lot of our schools, you can just walk in and just have access to the entire school.
Not in a lot of our schools, in some of our schools.
In a handful of our schools.
Right.
That's too many of our schools.
Right.
Ideally, we want to get to zero of those schools.
Right.
And so we're at the schools where they don't exist. We're building these hallways, vestibules where you have to go from the main entrance into the main office. There's no other way you can go. So a guided entryway, and that obviously prevents unauthorized people from entering the bulk of the building.
And then you get ID at that point so that you know everybody that's coming into your building.
Yes, and we check them with the sex offenders list and just a variety of other background checks before they proceed into the rest of the building.
Oh, that's good. So it does have kind of heightened security on all different levels without invasion of privacy.
Right. I mean, I think there's
You
a
show
line.
your driver's license.
There's a line between turning our schools into prisons and
Right.
keeping our kids safe. And I do want to say, what we're doing here is just patching the obvious holes we have in school security, not just in the context of gun violence, but our people should not just be able to wander into our schools. Ultimately, though, these things really will not help if someone has a gun and wants to hurt kids. Ultimately, the way we prevent this violence is by getting to the root of the problem, which is the guns themselves.
And gun laws.
Yeah, I mean that's the way we really tackle this issue. Because even with metal detectors, even with clear backpacks, it's not going to help if someone really wants to commit violence.
And in so many of these cases, what they have found is that there is, in addition to the guns, which are the first line, but there's also the mental health issue. In a lot of these cases, there's mental health issues where kids haven't gotten the support they need. And so you introduce a mental health issue with a gun, an easily obtainable gun, and you have a disaster waiting to happen. And so the first step is getting guns out of the house, and the second step is making sure that your kids are getting as much as they need, as far as mental health. So we did expand our mental health resources in our budget as far as our counselors and our psychologists and psychiatrists, which is really important. And we're planning to do a lot more around mental health in the upcoming school year because that is a focus that we know is needed beyond just the gun safety issue.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of Republicans or just people who Second Amendment fundamentalists, they say, oh, well, it's not a gun issue, it's a mental health issue. Okay, so do you want to fund mental health? No. So it is both. It makes sense. Now, I'm curious to know about simply gun rights or gun safety or control in general. Where do you stand on that? And a lot of people assume that once, the slippery slope issue, that once you start to regulate guns, it means no one can ever have a gun ever. Where exactly do you stand? Because I'm still kind of sorting that out for myself, and I know we have a diverse array of opinions.
I mean, I think ideally we want to get to a place where guns are regulated the same way cars are.
Mm-hmm.
Background checks, licensing, education, but ultimately, the people who are saying you want to hunt or go to the shooting range and get a gun and do it.
Well, I think the red flag laws in Maryland, I don't know if you saw that the red flag law that was passed, I think was a really good step in that direction, that if you know that somebody could be a risk and you can report that there is a mental health issue or abuse or whatever it is, that you need to keep a gun out of that person's hands and you report it, that you have a means to be able to do that.
Yeah, like you said, I like when people say, well, we should consider an approach similar to that of driving a car.
Right.
And cars are ubiquitous, and it's not like we're trying to take a car out of your hands. But you have to pass a test, and for example, even if you've had a seizure, like recently, you can't renew your license even. Similarly, when people say, "Oh, well, if you restrict it, then people are just going to find it anyway," how do we keep a gun out of a 3-year-old's hands? Well, I don't really see us having a problem with 3-year-olds driving trucks. Like, it's just not, it's not allowed, and it doesn't happen. Is it physically possible? Maybe, but it's not something you see.
I don't buy into that utility either, because then why would we pass any laws if we're just going to say, well, someone could still break them?
My brother-in-law is a responsible gun owner. He hunts deer with his and game, fowl, and he uses a gun locker to store his guns, a locked gun locker, and he always has. And I think that's a kind of measure that makes sense, is to keep your guns locked up.
Mm-hmm. So responsible gun ownership does not mean take all of your guns away and take away your freedom.
Nobody wants to take anyone's guns away. It's never been a serious policy. No one serious ever has floated that. It's just a fallacy that the other side uses to tear down reasonable people who just want to prevent this bloodshed.
Yeah, and I don't even really mean to be this sarcastic, but it is the straw man argument that I do see on social media and elsewhere. Not so much around people in Montgomery County, but I do bring that up because in my final question, I do want to know, have you especially encountered pushback for your speeches or your position?
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, like Montgomery County seems to, most people I interacted are more or less like you, but I don't know, like as someone who's so outspoken, do you have any of your peers argue at you with these kind of things, or?
No, not really. Some people will ask me like specifics as to what I want, and I'll tell them, and they'll say, "Oh, that sounds reasonable," and then we'll move on with our lives. The people who are most hostile towards me are middle-aged men and women who I've never met, sending me direct messages on Twitter.
Wow.
But I think, really, like, it's anyone in person who I've spoken with has ultimately ended up agreeing with me. When you're not behind a screen and you don't have to look at me in the eyes, it's easy to, like you said, turn me into a straw man, turn me into a scary government boy who wants to take your guns away. But really, I just want to prevent my peers from dying. Even when I was in Santa Fe, Texas, a couple weeks ago, which is a small Texas town that went overwhelmingly for Trump, a town of only 12,000. People did not disagree with me on the issues that I suggested on the gun issue, because these are ultimately common sense, extremely reasonable things. Despite what the other side tries to say, these are things which people like and would ultimately save people's lives.
And you've mentioned a few times about, Republicans who are against this, but there are certainly plenty of Republicans who agree and Democrats who agree that we need sensible gun legislation and are responsible gun users. And I'm glad you brought up the point about face-to-face communication, because that's also another piece of this. Like I say, we're using a lot of different strategies. Social media, teaching kids to use social media responsibly and making sure that they know the consequences if they don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Out of curiosity, what exactly was Hogan's position on this? I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of talking about the governor's race right now, but it seems like Hogan has taken, if I'm not mistaken, a moderate position on gun safety, but my inkling is that it's because of the Democratic supermajority in Annapolis that he kind of has to do that.
I think Hogan is smart enough to realize it's an election year.
Yeah.
But he is rated an A- from the NRA, so
That says enough.
I think that says enough.
Yeah. Well, that just says that not just who we elect as governor, but who we keep in Annapolis is gonna, a lot of people credit Hogan for being a moderate Republican, but how moderate would he be if he were not up for election in a blue state and if we didn't have a supermajority?
And if he's reelected, what might happen?
Exactly. So before we go, I just want to know, and I apologize if you always get asked this, but where do you see yourself going? I know you're going to Yale, but are you going to continue your involvement in education policy, or are you going to
definitely,
are you going to run for office?
Definitely in education policy. Probably not elected office, but we'll see what happens.
Me neither. And seriously, all the credit to you and everyone who's just been hitting the pavement so hard through the 26th. I mean, I respect all of you. I could only vote for 4 and 1 executive. I mean, I feel quite strongly about executive, but it's just, for all of the people that I voted for or were honorable mentions or didn't end up voting for,
Right.
It's just, this election season has been so intense, and I'm only a volunteer and commentator, and I'm exhausted. And I could only imagine what it is like to have a full-time job and be a parent and campaign. It's ridiculous. So plans for June 27th?
Well, they actually have a kiss and make up period.
Yeah,
party
that's
on
the
the
thing.
27th. So after that party, the next day, we're gonna get, my husband and I are gonna go away.
I think that's a common thing. What about yourself? Plans for the summer?
I don't know. Probably the same thing I'm doing now. Sleeping.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Jill and Matt. This was very informative, and I'm glad we got to squeeze in another interview before the primary, which is very fast upon us. And thank you for watching.